Let's go on to the next question. Maybe one for the guys this time, because I got this on Instagram actually yesterday, not specifically for the podcast, but I wanted to touch on it because I'm pretty sure I saw either the same guy or someone with the same question ask this on multiple different Q&As of people I know. This happens all the time. So the question is very simple, and it's something we discussed before, but a top set and back off sets or straight sets with a fixed RPE. Like these are the types of questions that people generally ask when it comes to training, and I think they come from a place of maybe just assuming that there's going to be a best answer. Like I wish there was, like assuming that there's going to be a best answer that's in some research paper or based on one specific mechanism, and this is very rarely the case when it comes to training. Like when I think about this question, I kind of think of, right, what do I do in practice with clients, and I'm like, all right, both. Like I do both very frequently, sometimes within the same program, sometimes never for one individual, like it'll always be one thing, and sometimes other individuals will have always the other thing. And the thing is, like, you really do have to ask yourself, like, what actually matters when it comes to training. And one of the biggest considerations for me is like adherence and enjoyment for the individual. Like if someone tells me that I love going into the gym and having a top set that I can work up to and then doing my back off sets, because I know once I've done good on my top set, I still feel motivated to do my back off sets. For other individuals, they go into the gym, and I actually see this a lot, they do their top set and ignore their back off sets. They're like, these don't matter because I hit a new PB. Okay, so you really have to ask yourself, like what way do you interact with the program you're doing, what do you enjoy, and what's most likely to give you the best results? Because ultimately, like, what's required is you to be able to put in sufficient effort on all of your sets. Like that's ultimately the requirement. And both of those strategies of, let's say, 4 sets at RPE 8 or 1 set at RPE 9 and 3 sets at RPE 7, like both of those things work perfectly fine, but you just need to find a way that you can consistently put in the effort and feel like you're excited to go to the gym every single day. I don't think there's any like best strategy from that question. I think both are going to work perfectly fine, especially like when you periodize that over time. Like why not do one phase where you do top sets and the next phase where you're kind of maybe slightly further from failure, see how that works, because ultimately training is about long term. It's about multi-year outcomes, like for some people multi-decade outcomes.
Especially because like most people, well that's not a lie, but a lot of people are training for a side effect of training.
Yeah.
Like they're training for the side effect of like muscle hypertrophy. But that's like a side effect.
Yeah.
That's not the effect, you know? And obviously you can bias things towards enhancing that process, but that's not the actual effect you're looking for, because what you're actually looking for is to progressively get stronger over time.
Pretty
you know?
much.
Like that's the underlying mechanism. So should you do reps in reserve? Should you do multiple sets? Should you do top sets and back off sets? Irrelevant if you're not getting stronger over time while keeping tension on the muscle. Like obviously that's the prerequisite. If you're going like, I got stronger over time, and your technique went from perfection to absolute sloppy, bouncing around, whatever. Like your bench press, say, it was like a 3-second eccentric, paused, and control concentric, and then you just went through like that's not, they're not comparable. So like there's all these other variables that go into it, but ultimately the goal is to progressively get stronger over time. So what, like Gary was saying, it essentially comes down to what enthuses you more to consistently get into the gym. And like think about it logically as well. Like there's going to be some exercises that do better with a top set, back off set approach.
Yeah.
Whereas there's going to be some exercises that just don't work well with that. For example, you might go, okay, shoulder press, like a barbell shoulder press. You might be like, yes, I love working up to a top set on that. Do a back off set or 2 or 3 back off sets, and I like that approach, right? And you're like, I love feeling like I'm getting stronger and pushing it on that. First of all, on that, especially with something like the shoulder press, like you're going to have to start micro-loading that, because it's not exactly a muscle that has a huge potential for like rapid growth. Like you're not going to be adding on even 2.5 kilos per week onto that, So that's the first consideration you have to think, like what's the progressibility of that exercise. But then also just think about your workout then. Say we're focusing on shoulders, we move to like a lateral raise variation, Are you going to do a top set and a back off set on that?
Yeah.
You know, like that. It's probably not the best exercise for that approach. Whereas something where you're like, I'm keeping a few reps in reserve, and I'm also just, you know, doing more sets, then accumulating more volume, but slowly over time, you know, progressing the weight that I use. That may be more appropriate for that exercise. So you shouldn't get this dichotomous approach in your head where it's like it's one or the other. It's like they have their qualities that are good for certain individuals at certain times, depending on the exercise, depending on the goal. Like personally, I actually really enjoy top sets and back off sets.
Yeah.
But I can't do that when I'm doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like I probably could, but I would actually have to do essentially both. I would have to do top sets with reps in reserve. You know, if that makes sense, like top sets with reps in reserve and back off sets with reps in reserve. Because if I just went all out, my ability to train, because I train twice a day on the days I resistance train, like I'm just going to be in absolute agony trying to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu later that evening, you know? So for me, even though that's an approach that I really favor in terms of actually getting me into the gym and progressing, to actually progress given my current circumstances, I'm more reps in reserve. Like I do, like we'll say one. This is literally my program for the exercises I have. Or we'll say the compound exercises I have. It's like 1 to 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps in a 4-week block, and then 1 to 3 sets of 6 to 8 reps in a 4-week block. You know, and like I have that as 1 to 3 sets because there's going to be days where I'm going in after a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu session the night before, and I'm like, my shoulder isn't really there, you know, but to, like if I'm fully guns raring, blazing, ready to go ahead, I know what I need to do, you know? So for me, a more, we'll say, auto-regulatory approach helps me stay on track, you know, given my overall goals. So I just think this whole argument between like, our reps in reserve better, or our top sets and back off sets, like, realistically it doesn't matter. Also, people just forget the fact that you can also have like 3 top sets, you know, where it's like you could actually go like, I'm just going to 3 sets of failure, all at the same weight, you know, like that's, people were doing that before there was this top set back off set approach. It's essentially like this top set back off set approach is what would have been traditionally called reverse pyramid training, because previously there would have been like pyramid training where you go, I work up to a heavy set of 15, a heavy set of 12, a heavy set of 8, a heavy set of 5, and it's like, well, if you accumulated so much volume and fatigue going into that heavy set of 5, you're always going to be fatigued, you know, so you're never actually going to get to a true 5 rep max. So if you flip that on its head and I do my heavy set of 5 first, and then 8, and then 12, and then 15, you know, it's like, that's a reverse pyramid, you know? And that is where this approach came about, you know. So like, there's obviously pros and cons to it. Also, it really depends on your overall goal, because for some individuals, there's going to be an approach that actually gets them stronger quicker, right? And what I mean by that is like you, due to your genetic makeup, due to your like muscle fiber types, due to your fucking nervous system, like you might be better at just doing a top set, going all out, and you're able to recover from that, and that allows you to progress quicker. Whereas other individuals, if they did that, they'd just be burnt out by the next, say, lower body session. They're just like, my output is just fucking gone. Whereas they don't have the same advantages in that respect as this other individual, you know. And you'll see generally these type of people gravitate. It's easier actually to discuss this in the context of powerlifting, because that's the actual outcome rather than the side effect that we're looking at, you know. Whereas you're like, I want to get stronger on the bench, squat, deadlift. It's like, well, how are programs designed to do that? Let's actually look at this. You're like, oh, some people actually do a top set and back off set, and that's the way they set up their program, and oh, they're actually relatively successful. Oh, they're actually world record holders. And then you look at it, it's like, okay, and then some people actually do more of a reps in reserve or PE type training, more volume, and they are also world record holders. So it's like there's obviously many ways to skin a cat, and like if you're looking at the outcome of what we're saying, progressively getting stronger over time, then you can see that there's many approaches to that, you know. So yeah, I just think it's a non-argument. I'm like, it's do both when it's appropriate, if you don't know when it's appropriate, then you shouldn't even be asking the question.
Yeah, like I think if you've got a hard stance in this argument where you're like, everything needs to be a failure, one set to failure and then a back off set, or you're the person that's like, oh, it needs to be like multiple sets of reps in reserve. I think neither of those people have ever been exposed to science and definitely haven't read much of the research on these topics, because like...
Also, they're not being truthful with themselves, because you see loads of them, they're like, oh, I used to do 3 sets of 10 and built the majority of my mass on that, and then I started doing this lower volume. It's like, people do that in the fitness industry so much. They look at what they are currently doing rather than what got them to where they ultimately are. You know, it's like, oh, what I'm doing now represents the cutting edge, and it's like, you honestly can't tell. Like, obviously you can tell what you were doing wrong. If you're doing an exercise just completely wrong, you're like, well, that probably wasn't contributing much. If anything, it was detracting from my recovery or whatever, you know. But you can be like, oh, well, I was doing all this stuff and I was getting good results, and you built a base with that stuff. You know, maybe it was drop sets and fucking, I don't know, supersetting, like synergistic supersets or whatever the fuck. It's like, you cannot tell me that like that was just did not contribute anything to your results right now. You know, so it's like, yes, you might think that this is your current approach is a better approach, but that there was a whole process that led you to that, both physically and obviously mentally, where you're like, okay, well, like my thought processes have developed over time. But yeah, that's just
because like personally, I think once you begin to delve into a more kind of scientific way of thinking about training, and you actually delve into the research itself, you end up becoming more agnostic, like not more in one camp. You don't come closer to like the one special program. If anything, you take a step back and you're like, oh yeah, lots of things actually work pretty fine, and like I don't care if someone says they do West Side training and someone else says they do Bulgarian training. There's merit to both, and you can see why both approaches might work in some contexts. I can see why that person did well on German volume training, because like the point is, lots of different things work, and ultimately you need to just find a strategy that you enjoy and that's appropriate for you, and that's going to change over time. The thing with training is that if you're a beginner and you're early on in your training career, you probably don't need to worry like too much about
anything
about any of this stuff, because like you've got like the amount of training that you need to do in order to adapt and improve is pretty low, you know. But as you begin to advance further, the level required for you to adapt begins to move up towards the maximum that you can possibly do. So like if you've got a ceiling to how much you can do, whether that be due to time, other stressors, recovery resources, whatever, if there's a maximum amount you can do, because you've already adapted so much, that window becomes really narrow. So you end up balancing in this point where, right, I need to find like the perfect training strategy that allows me to recover and come in and perform in the next session. Because you see that with advanced guys, like if they push it too hard, like if they go from their 6 sessions that are an hour and a half to 6 sessions that are 2 hours, like that can crush them. They're already lifting really heavy weights, they know how to push themselves, so it's a very...
And also you see this as well, like, and that, what you're saying really confuses beginners. Because you look at what someone, like I was touching on there, like you look at what someone's doing that's a world record holder, and they're like, yeah, I squat once per week. But then you listen to all these like scientific studies and you're like, oh, well, they're saying like twice per week is the optimal. It's like, yeah, this guy squats 900 pounds. You know, it's like this, like the amount of overload they're able to generate in that one session, like it's not comparable to you squatting 2 plates, you know. And it's like that really confuses people when you look at just the science, because it's like, well, like maybe they would do better if they did a lower we'll say RPE, like they didn't go to their fucking max out all out effort set. But like, you can't actually say that, because they've found an approach that allows them to get to the gym, to progress, and be a world record holder. You know? So, like, I just think this argument is like, find the approach that works best for you. Like, you look at like West Side Barbell, like you could go like, oh, they've got loads of record holders, and they essentially do both. Yeah. Like they do like their max effort days, and then they do like a repetition effort day or a dynamic effort day. But either way, that repetition or dynamic effort day is essentially reps in reserve or RPE training, you know, and their max effort day is, you know, top sets and back off sets. So it's like, who the fuck says you have to do one or the other? Yeah, it's a real cop-out answer, but basically everything works. Different things might work better for different people, and
that's alright.
And the easiest way to understand this is, are you recovering and are you progressively getting stronger over time?
Yeah, there is inter-individual variability. So anytime, like that's just one final point on this. Like very often, what people will do is they'll have someone that they prefer online, like whether it be Triage or I don't know the muscle
Do other people follow other people?
the you know the muscle members.
The muscle manatees.
The muscle manatees. Like so, there's other people that maybe people might listen to, and they also listen to us, and they listen to I don't know Joe Bennett, and they listen to 3DMJ and whatever. They'll just pick like one person and see what they do, and then they're like, all right, I'm going to do what they do because they're quote unquote evidence based and they seem to have great gains, whereas that person could have a very like reasonable justification for why they do a particular program. A good example of that would be like Jeff Alberts of 3DMJ, who's like the most experienced out of all of them, who's been doing bodybuilding for the longest and is the largest and does the least training volume. Like he does very little training volume because over multiple years he realized that like, oh, this is actually what I respond best to. I always pick up niggles as I do more volume, so I'm just going to do that. But can all of us do just 8 sets a week per muscle group or whatever and grow? Like no, not at all. And you're definitely not going to see that in some individuals. So yeah, things just aren't clear cut. Like
just get stronger. Like this is literally, because I know it's really confusing when you're like, what the fuck should I do? It's like, are you getting stronger over time with exercises that fit your body? You know, again, it doesn't matter if it's a fucking chest press or a bench press. Like if your goal is like building your chest, at the end of the day it doesn't fucking matter. Like it's all made up, right? So are you getting stronger over time? If you are, and you feel like you're recovering, you know, you're not noticing any signs, your sleep is not being disrupted, you're not feeling excessively sore every day, you know, all the stuff that you want to do during your day isn't being impeded by the fact that you are hardly able to walk because you're crippled from that leg workout. It's like once you know you're recovering and you feel like you are moving towards your goal, if you are getting stronger slowly over time, again, you have to look at this over a longer time period. There's probably going to be dips and ups and down, again, depending on what your diet's like, depending on your lifestyle factors, etc. But if you can look at a training block or training years and go, oh, I was benching 1 plate and now I'm benching 2 plates, it's like, I can pretty much guarantee that your chest is going to be bigger. Like, it's pretty much a no factor, you know? Whether that's a huge magnitude of difference, like whether you went from a fucking 30-inch chest to a 52-inch chest, that's an individual response. But I can guarantee if you went from 2 plates to 3 plates, you at least gained 1 inch. you gained something, you know? So once you're getting stronger over time, that's the easiest way to delineate what's going on. Like that's the key factor. Anything after that is just, it's a protocol.
Yeah.
You know? Like it's like, that's just a method rather than a fundamental or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you could basically summarize it as like if you want to be really accurate about what's most likely to be a proxy for muscle growth, it would be like multi-rep, let's say moderate rep strength. So let's say 6 to 12 reps, moderate rep strength across multiple sets over multiple years while also gaining body weight. Like if you've done that, like I'd be very hard pressed to think that like, oh, you didn't gain any muscle. Like you most likely did. So if you can put all those factors together, like you're doing a pretty good job when it comes to muscle.